I think at this point that it's pretty safe to say that Metroid is officially back in full force. Well, it's actually been back for a little while now, and with us finally getting the long, and I mean long awaited gameplay reveal trailer of Metroid Prime 4 at the last Direct, what better time to talk about Metroid than now? As a series, Metroid is known for a lot of things, but one of its biggest is its extremely sparse release schedule. Since the series' debut all the way back in 1986, the Metroid series has had a total of 18 games released, which includes any and all spin-off titles and remakes. Even back in the series' earlier years, this sparse release schedule would be something that kind of defined the franchise. Metroid itself was never a series that was completely abandoned or forgotten by Nintendo like Kid Icarus or F-Zero, but it was also never as prevalent as something like Mario or Zelda either. In fact, if I'm to relate Metroid to any series at all, it honestly would be Donkey Kong of all franchises, which ironically is my other favorite Nintendo franchise along with Metroid. When we look at the history and legacy of both franchises, you begin to see a lot of similar patterns present in both series. Both of these franchises would experience an almost decades-long resurgence, one immediately following the other. For Donkey Kong, this revitalization of the franchise would take place in the 1990s with the Donkey Kong Country trilogy that would forever change the series going forward. As for Metroid, its resurgence would quickly follow in the 2000s with the Metroid Prime trilogy that would forever change its series going forward as well. Wait a second. Not only that, but both of these new trilogies would go on to be hailed as not only the best games in their respective franchises, but some of the best games of all time. Both of these series have also been handled by Retro Studios at some point, with them being responsible for the aforementioned Prime trilogy, as well as the latest two entries in the Donkey Kong series, Returns and Tropical Freeze. But come the 2010s, you wouldn't be wrong if you assumed that the Metroid series was on its last legs. From getting a total of 9 games in the 2000s to only getting 3 in the following decade was definitely not a good sign, especially considering the fact that 2 out of the 3 games released within that time frame are considered to be 2 of the worst Metroid games to date. Despite the gloomy future that seemed to be almost imminent, things would start to take an unexpected turn come 2017. This year would boast 2 major and well-needed victories for the Metroid franchise, the first being the infamous reveal of the 4th Metroid Prime game at that year's E3. Now, before you go down to the comments to write the inevitable, oh, it only took 8 years, let's put this into perspective real quick. Because despite the fact that we would ultimately hear nothing about this game for over 7 years, the fact that we were getting confirmation that it was happening at all was good enough for many. If it wasn't something they weren't sure they were going to release, then they wouldn't have gotten it announced in the first place, so the fact that we had a logo was worth something. In addition to that, this announcement would be the jumping off point for a ton of rumors about other potential Metroid games coming to the Switch, specifically claims that we would be receiving remasters of some of the older Prime games to hopefully catch players up to speed before Prime 4's release. They weren't wrong. When it came to these specific rumors, there were 2 main factions at play. Those who believed we were getting the full trilogy remastered similar to the one on Wii, and those who believed we'd be getting the first Prime game with the possibility of remasters of 2 and 3 down the line, all as individual releases. Although we now know how far off Prime 4's release would be compared to its initial announcement, the amount of potential possibilities in front of Metroid fans was good enough to keep us all going. No matter how long the wait may be, unless Nintendo officially pulled the plug, Prime 4 was still somewhat in reach. But on top of all that, later in 2017, we would also receive a remaster of Metroid 2 Samus Returns for the 3DS. Now, although some might be turned off by the word remaster, considering this is what the original game looked and played like, this was basically a new game altogether, which at the end of the day is all we the fans really want: games. So to get this was another major win. For many, the original Metroid 2 has always been a pretty obscure game, with many considering Super Metroid to be the more proper sequel. Now, I'll agree, the original NES game is somewhat difficult to revisit today, but this, I wouldn't even make an attempt with this one. So to get a more easy and accessible way to play this game was amazing to see, with it even somewhat revitalizing the want for more 2D games in the series. E3 2021, the last official E3 we ever got. It was really cool to see the return of the event. Sure, it was only absent for a year, but that year felt like a fucking eternity, and damn, it was good to have it back. Now, after Nintendo's colossal fuck up with that February's Direct, this could only go one of 2 ways, and thankfully this Direct ended up being everything the fans had wanted and been yearning for the past year and a half. This Direct was everything we should have gotten back in February. It was just so fucking good. Maybe I'm a little biased because I watched this with a bunch of friends from high school, some of whom I hadn't seen for a while on our senior week beach day, but at the time this truly felt like Nintendo's triumphant return. After getting a non-dog shit character that nobody asked for at the beginning of the Direct, we got a few cool announcements, like a new Monkey Ball remaster that I totally thought was Donkey Kong for a hot second, a new Mario Party Best Of collection, but then it happened. Shinya Takahashi came on screen and explained that yes, they were in fact working on Prime 4 but had nothing to show at this time. Shocking, I know. But then he mentioned something about another Metroid game that just so happens to be the first 2D Metroid game in almost 20 years. And then... holy shit! No fucking way! Metroid Dread is one of the most notorious pieces of lost gaming media to have ever existed. This game has been through everything, from rumors of active development, early development, barely starting at all, to having multiple different release dates, cancellations, to being real enough to be teased in Metroid Prime 3, to maybe not even existing at all. This game has had such an extensive history, and I strongly encourage anyone that's interested in both gaming and lost media to check out the crazy amount of content surrounding this game's extensive history. It really is a crazy story. But on top of the bombshell of this game actually being real after all those years, the fact that this game was also slated to come out was the cherry on top. In the coming months between E3 and its October release, Nintendo had a pretty good marketing campaign for this game. To actually see a Metroid game be one of Nintendo's new major releases was something really special. Many people forget that Metroid and Zelda both began in 1986, and while Zelda fans are still probably seething about the lackluster 30th anniversary, for Metroid just getting a new game was more than good enough, let alone a game as infamous as Dread. And on October 8th, 2021, Metroid Dread would finally be released, quickly becoming the best-selling Metroid game ever. This game is so fucking good. It is everything you would want from a modern 2D Metroid game, and it did not pull any of its punches. It is difficult and confusing as hell, a staple of most Metroid games. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, this game is brutal, but it is also a ton of fun. After its announcement at E3, I spent so much time in the months leading up to its release finally sitting down and playing through both the original Metroid on NES and Super Metroid, and let me just tell you, Dread fits in perfectly. With how good the game was received and its record-breaking sales for the series, and Nintendo still trying to convince everyone that Prime 4 was still being worked on, it seemed as though Metroid Dread would be the start of a new era of resurgence for the Metroid series. Nintendo would end up having an amazing 2023 with the new Zelda, Pikmin, a brand new 2D Mario game, and so much more. And it was all kicked off with an amazing Direct taking place on February 8th, 2023. This Direct really was the setup for such an amazing year, opening up with our first real look of Pikmin 4, Splatoon DLC, Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games coming to Nintendo Switch Online, a completely new course for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with the bombshell that we would finally be getting some new characters, and of course the amazing trailer for Tears of the Kingdom, doubling down the fact that it would in fact release on May 12th. But in between all of that, Nintendo would just casually drop news about a Metroid Prime remaster, and that it was available digitally right after the Direct, with a physical version releasing a few weeks later. Like, what? This reveal was kind of strange. Many people, including myself, were just kind of blindsided by the reveal, like it completely came out of left field, and the nonchalant way in which Nintendo discussed it was also really strange. Like, the way it was discussed almost made you feel like it was talked about before in a previous Direct and wasn't anything too surprising. And considering this remaster had been rumored about for years at this point, the fact that this wasn't a huge deal will always not be weird to me. Maybe if we got it in a less packed Direct it would have been different, who could really know. But for as strange as its reveal was, to not be strung along for months, hell years about a game, and to pretty much get it the same day it was revealed was really cool. I don't know if Nintendo decided to change their strategy with Metroid after the joke Prime 4 became, but I'd much rather get reveals closer to launch in this way instead of getting the "it's happening" when it's just a logo or concept trailer. Metroid Prime Remastered is a phenomenal game. It truly looks and feels like a completely new and modern game. Considering I've never played any of the Prime games before this was an amazing introduction to these games. Thank God it's the first one, and for only $40, this thing was practically a steal, especially considering Nintendo's weird pricing scheme when it comes to remakes and remasters. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not paying $50 for a remake of a 2004 GBA game, I just refuse to do it. This game ended up being Nintendo's major spring release for last year, being the thing to pretty much hold us over until Tears of the Kingdom, which in most circumstances is kind of shitty to say, but considering this is a remaster of a game from 2002, I'll let it slide. If it wasn't for Tears of the Kingdom releasing just a few short months after Metroid Prime Remastered, I do believe it would have gotten a little more attention from Nintendo. Despite that though, Metroid Prime Remastered is still considered to be one of Nintendo's major releases of 2023. 2024 has been an interesting year for sure, with us not getting a full-fledged Direct until June, a full 10-month gap between Directs that completely skipped the annual Winter Direct season. And throughout all the speculation about what we would see, Metroid more than ever was a guaranteed prediction. We may not have all agreed on what exact game we would get, whether that be remasters of Primes 2 and 3 or the long-awaited reveal of Prime 4, but we all knew for sure that Metroid would have some sort of heavy-hitting presence at the event. Typically when it comes to Nintendo Directs, the closing game is usually one of the biggest the company has to offer. Mario Odyssey, Smash Bros, Tears of the Kingdom are all games that have featured as a closing game of a Direct, with Metroid Prime 4 being the most recent. For a franchise that was practically on its deathbed less than a decade ago, to now being a main highlight of multiple Directs is something truly amazing to see and experience, and as we inch closer to the series' 40th anniversary, it's safe to say that Metroid is here to stay. Now if we could do the same for Donkey Kong,